Hi guys, welcome back to my Nyx Reads book channel, and today I'm finishing my 4-part 2021 book series wrap-up. Today I'm finally going to talk about the worst books that I read throughout the year. Feel free to support this channel by subscribing if you love watching book videos. I might end up bashing some of your favorite books today, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. I picked this up because it seemed like a very thematic, cozy, wintry read, kind of like Twilight for adults. This book was such a letdown. I cannot believe that the level of cringiness I had in this book was the same one or even worse than Twilight, because in Twilight at least you have, pubescent teenagers, or at least Bella is a pubescent teenager. They're in high school, obviously everything is awkward. But in Discovery of Witches, the main characters are almost 30 or 40 years old in physical age. They have PhDs and they're very well-known researchers, so you would expect them to be super mature, but they acted worse than teenagers. In this world you have witches, vampires, and demons living alongside humans, not in complete harmony, but people are aware of their existence, but there's a rule that these supernatural beings are not allowed to mingle. So our main character, Diana, she has a PhD, she's a historian. At the moment she's working in Oxford, where in the library while doing her studies or research, she comes across this manuscript with seemingly magical abilities or competence that open up to her because she's in fact a witch. She's been in denial of her powers her whole life, so she doesn't really know what to do with that, and she encounters Matthew, who is also a researcher who happens to be a vampire, and together they basically embark on this mystery of trying to figure out what this manuscript is. Obviously there's like a little something going on between those two. I actually have a list on my phone with things that I found were just as problematic as in Twilight. I found myself actually looking up if this book was written before or after Twilight. I was kind of hoping before, because if it was written after, it means that there was just too much crossover between these books, which I guess is kind of a thematic problem, because if you're writing about a relationship with a vampire, there's going to be crossovers in the issues. So like in Twilight, we have the vampire looking at a girl from afar, looking at a sleeping girl, feeding on animals instead of humans, because obviously that's kind of more noble. Diana doing that thing where she's like not moving, basically holding her breath type of thing like Bella does when the vampire is hungry. Matthew always feeling like he has to take care and feed Diana. She's a woman in her end of 20s, for God's sakes. She has a PhD. She should know how to take care of herself. Obviously ostentatious traveling methods because he's so freaking rich. Then there were other issues that I had which I didn't necessarily compare to Twilight or they're related to. For example, Matthew holding Diana physically against her will, which I thought was not okay. He keeps bossing her around. For some reason there's a lot of yoga and riding horses in this book. Diana having all the powers in the world, not just one. And the list goes on. I'm not going to continue, but there was just quite a few issues that I had with this book, especially in how Diana behaved. It just really didn't make any sense, because she was supposedly a very well-known researcher, a woman who knows what she's doing, who's confident and smart, so I just couldn't understand. What I really liked in the story were the parts where they were actually researching facts and the history of witches, demons, and vampires, and it really comes through that the author herself also has a research background, so that I really enjoyed, but we just didn't get enough of that. There was just a lot of nothing happening in this book. It feels like 500 pages of Diana making herself a tea. I will not continue with book 2 and 3 of this trilogy, but I will watch the show. And I was especially unlucky with the mystery thrillers that I read this year. The overall theme with this video, and the problem that I seem to have with all of these books, is there was just a whole lot of nothing going on. The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. This seems to be kind of a polarizing book, because I know people that have read this book and were also kind of like, what the heck, why is this so overhyped? But then I also see this book on a lot of best thrillers lists and people seem to really love it, which obviously I don't understand at all. This book features the unreliable alcoholic narrator trope. We have Anna Fox, who lives in a beautiful house in New York City. She basically never leaves the house, but through the window she sees a new family moving in across the street, the Russell family. She befriends the mom of the family, Jane, and one day Anna witnesses something seemingly impossible and completely horrible through her window happening over at the Russell's house. You're kind of left with, what did she actually witness? Barely anything happens in this book, and yes, I just said that our main character is basically trapping herself in her own house, so by default there's not going to be a lot of action happening, but still it feels like chapter after chapter that you're just kind of waiting for anything. One of my issues also is that this obsession with what happened to Jane seems almost unbelievable because they only had a very short encounter in the beginning. They are not what I would call friends, and yes, obviously I understand that if you see something weird you're going to get obsessed with that, especially Anna, because she's so secluded and basically nothing else is going on in her life. It's just not very well explained and explored in the book, so to me as a reader it was a bit unbelievable. Also, this book spoiled a bunch of big movie endings. So if you've never watched Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock, for example, and you read this book, you're gonna be spoiled. I guess the movies in question are a bit old, and I guess there's a statute of limitation for spoilers, but it did bug me. I did guess one of the bigger twists kind of in the middle of the book, which usually that isn't a problem if a book is written well. It's not the conclusion that you're after, but in this case, because not a lot was happening in the book, it was kind of a bummer. And on top of that, after I read this book and I did a little bit of research and I landed on the author's Wikipedia page, he did a bunch of very questionable things, which leads me to say I do not want to spend a cent on this particular author anymore. Next up, we have Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. You might know this author from her book The Girl on the Train. In this story, we have a single mother that lives in a small town that is one day found drowned in the river, where the summer prior, a teenage girl also was found drowned. And there's kind of a history about women dying in this river. She leaves behind a teenage daughter and her sister has to take care of her. Obviously, this teenage daughter has a lot of secrets, like a lot of other people in this town that you kind of meet throughout the story. I found almost none of the characters in this book intriguing, except there was a storyline, I think from the 16th century, where I think one of the first ever girls drowned in this river, which wasn't even explored. The twists and turns in this book didn't really create a grand effect for me. I just had an overall very low enjoyment while reading this book. The tropes used in this book are just so much better written in different mystery thrillers. The bigger revelations in this story didn't feel exciting or surprising, but there was just no person interesting enough for me to care about their fate. So The Girl on a Train is much better than this one, but even that was kind of an average read for me. So I don't know if I'm going to pick up Paula Hawkins again unless she releases a book and it has like an average of 4.5 on Goodreads. All the Missing Girls by Miranda. This is my first book of this author, and I am very disappointed that I disliked it so much. She's apparently very well known for her small town mysteries, and this is quite an old one from her. Follow Nicolette, who after 10 years of leaving her small town hometown, she goes back to take care of her dad. One of the reasons she left in the first place was because her back then best friend Corinne just went missing, and while her stay there in the present, another woman goes missing. What I did like about the story, and this actually kept me reading and I went through this book very fast because of it, is the format that it's told in. So you pick the story up at day 15 and then you work your way backwards, so from day 15 back to day 1. This is the kind of book that I read where I kept reading and reading, waiting for something to happen, but again, there was just nothing that really hooked me and grabbed my attention. None of the characters' backstory really sucked me in, and through the format of telling the story backwards, it kind of plays with that unreliable narrator trope. The ending left me very unsatisfied, I have to say. But because I have heard so many great things about Miranda, and this is only the first book that I read from her, I am not giving up. So I think next I'm just gonna tackle The Last House Guest, because I think out of all her books this has the highest ratings, and as I mentioned before, All the Missing Girls is kind of one of her older works, so I'm expecting if I pick up a more recent book of hers that her writing just got so much better. So I don't have a burning hate for the 3 thrillers that I just talked about. As you can probably tell, my problem with them is that they just really left me bored. So next up we have a romance book, and I can safely say in this case I think it's not the book that is my problem, it's really the genre. So during a summer road trip, my boyfriend and I listened to The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. This is the original material for the Bridgerton series, which you've probably seen around Netflix. But yeah, it turns out historical romance is just really not for me. I love historical fiction, so when you have epic stories that span, let's say, a decade, whose story is woven into major historical events that actually did happen in real life. So historical romance, compared to it, and I couldn't help but compare it a bit, it felt too plain and stripped down for me. In this story, we're looking at Daphne, a young debutante in Regency London who has to find a new husband, and in doing so she meets the Duke Simon, and they start this fake dating ruse to help each other out in their respective objectives. This was just not for me. I can see how people find this super entertaining and enjoyable. I just cringe way too fast, too hard, and so the dialogues were just kind of painful for me to listen at times, and this overly infatuation and insta-love is just, at least at the moment, nothing I personally enjoy. Everything just happened way too fast for me, and if you can't get with insta love, then I don't think that historical romance books or romance books in general are for you. So in this case, I'm saying it's me, it's not the book. Interestingly enough though, I gave this book a 1-star rating while my boyfriend gave it a 3-star rating. And next up we have a fantasy book which I didn't expect to find on this list. It's The Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. When I picked up this book, I was craving a really good fantasy series, and this book has, I think, an average of a 4-star rating on Goodreads. I 100% expected to hop on the bandwagon and just love this book. We follow this very young girl called Nona, and she gets rescued by this convent that trains killer nuns. The idea itself is great. It sounds super badass, doesn't it? And I like that it really focuses on Nona's journey, and there's almost no romance in this book to distract from that journey whatsoever. This book didn't shy away from very violent fighting scenes and graphic fighting scenes, because at the end of the day it is killer nuns, but it just didn't work for me. Oddly, in this book I had to keep rereading sentences very often throughout the book. It was almost like a comma was missing sometimes, or a sentence could have been sliced in half, and I wasn't sure what the sentence was trying to say. When I looked at the book pages, it took 75% of the book for something to happen that felt like, okay, the prologue is over, because the first 75% focused on an issue that happens pretty much in the first chapters that I thought is kind of a small thing, and you know, we're gonna gloss over that. This is something that introduces us to Nona and her issues and her temper, but for some reason we kept coming back to it. In this series we're playing around with the chosen one trope, but in this case it left me very confused because I didn't even know what the chosen one is supposed to do. But this book really just felt like a prologue because it left me with so many questions about this world. There's just a lot that I didn't understand about the continent itself, and even what this special chosen one is supposed to do. I didn't know what the stakes are, or what that huge problem in this world is that this person has to solve. It just really wasn't clear to me, so I didn't know what I was reading for besides Nona's journey to become a killer nun. I did like the friendships and the relationships between the girls and the nuns. So yeah, my question is, do you need to read all 3 of the books in order to understand the continent and the magic system? Because I get that in a series, with every new installation you learn something new, but I would have expected to at least have a general understanding of what's going on and why things are going on within book 1, and I just really didn't get that. And it left me with a feeling of, was I reading the same book as everybody else? So needless to say, I'm not going to continue on with this story. If you have read this, please let me know your thoughts. So that's the worst books that I read in 2021 that I just really can't recommend. Let me know in a comment if any of these books you actually love, and let me know why. Maybe you think my opinion is crazy. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and feel free to subscribe to support this channel and to get more bookish content from me. I'll put the links of the 3 other videos in this wrap-up series down below so you can check out my most disappointing, my most surprising, and my best books of 2021. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.